to get in the society that we want in this room. But yeah, austerity, I see the harm of it every day in my job. Everyone knows about how the NHS has been severely underfunded over the past few years. It's been getting worse and worse year on year. I've been working in the A&E over the winter, and you know this, corridor medicine becoming the norm, people waiting 6 hours to see a doctor. It's hard. For me, what I find even harder as a doctor is actually, I see how austerity, not just, actually I think our health service has been protected to some extent, but what I see is how the politics of the past few years has really damaged people and our social infrastructure. So it really, it breaks my heart when I have people coming in who've tried to end their life because they just can't get access to basic welfare. Sort of simple things that should be a basic human right is being denied, increasingly denied to too many people over the past few years. And that hasn't changed today. So welfare hasn't changed. Housing, this is such a big issue. I can't tell you how many of my patients come in, particularly to A&Es at night, because they don't have somewhere to stay at night. And again, nothing about council housing in that budget. So yeah, the harms of austerity go much further than buildings, and that hasn't been addressed in that budget today.
Yeah. Okay, well, your experience, of course, the NHS is the end point for so many people, of course, in crisis. And so much of the impact of austerity hits our communities and ends up in our hospitals and our A&E departments, in mental health clinics and elsewhere. So why do you think, there's a couple of questions that have come in on this I think are really interesting. Diana, she's a social worker in Dundee, and she's asking, why do you think the crisis in social care was ignored today?
Because I don't think enough has been, I think from a lot of the announcements today were things that could get good headlines. And I just don't think social care has been enough on the political agenda over the past few years. The social care crisis, I think, is worse than the crisis in our NHS. Okay, the vacancies, 120,000 vacancies in our social care service, but also we have a social care service that is just, it's unfair, people can't access it. And I'll tell you, I have elderly patients coming in who have urine on their clothes, feces on their clothes, because they're just not being cleaned. Basic things here, basic things. People are not being allowed to live with dignity. That's happening right now. 1.4 million elderly people, at least, are not having the social care that they need. So that's being cleaned, being fed, being given their pills, being looked after, being allowed to live with basic dignity. That's not happening. And the reason why they didn't do anything, because they didn't think that they could get political capital from it. So that's where we come in, right? If we want something on political agenda, the Tories, they don't have values, but they care about being in power. So we need to put this on the political agenda, and then we'll see action about it.
Well, thanks.
I actually think it's because it is a really tough issue, and anywhere where it takes more than saying we're going to build a new hospital or build a new road, anything that's just not an easy kind of shiny new thing, it requires more in-depth thought and actually having some compassion for people. They don't know what to say, and that is why they keep putting off the social care issue, even though we know it's in crisis. And I think a lot of people do care about it because they are struggling with their parents or grandparents, and they're seeing how bad it is. And the coronavirus obviously has shown that it's in real trouble as well. There's over, I think there's 1.4 million people working in the social care sector, very poorly paid, a lot of women, a lot of migrants, and
insecure.
And I just think that because it is quite a difficult one, they just haven't wanted to really engage with it.
Okay, and Jeremy, your thoughts on, you gave us a good oversight in your introduction about your thoughts on the budget. I don't know whether you want to concentrate on anything in particular, clearly social care, and positioning the UK really for the challenges of the future, the failures, the missed opportunities of the government, particularly around the Green New Deal, where Labour was so strong in the last election.
There's a number of thoughts. Firstly, that what the budget completely failed to acknowledge was there's a whole problem coming down the line quite quickly, in that the trade agreement with the European Union ends in December. There is no trade agreement with the United States, and I tried to expose in the election what the demands were of the United States, which was access to public services, access to the national health market, as they deftly call it. I don't know anything about a national health market. I know about a national health service, big difference. And unless there is some clarity about the trade arrangements with Europe after the end of December, then there are obviously problems in manufacturing industry, particularly all over the country. I raised that in my response to the budget. John McDonnell, no doubt, will be raising that in greater detail tomorrow. On the service provision, I think the social care crisis is absolutely massive. You've got a workforce that is, I really detest the idea of describing people as unskilled workers. If you're a care worker and you're caring for one of my relatives who is in desperate need of care and support, I recognize you as a decent, good, skilled worker who is underpaid and under-recognized for what you do, and they should be treated with the respect they deserve. And that has to mean restoring the public element in the delivery of social care. The former council-run places that have now been sold off or privatised, or the number of care companies that are going broke because they can't make ends meet or can't survive in that particular market. Let's take the market out of it and insert the principle of the right of people. I like the way you put it, Sonia, the way that they can live with some dignity in their lives, because I can only imagine what it's like for yourself and others working in the NHS. You're in an A&E department, you're working and you see a queue of people extending for hours, and you're doing your very best for patient number 1, knowing that patient number 2 might be even more needy, patient number 3 totally desperate, and so on. And you've got to work your way through all of that. And then people come in who are desperate for somewhere to live, desperate to be looked after in some way. And what you're dealing with is the absolute sharp end of what austerity has done to people in this country, particularly the most vulnerable. So I do think the issues of social care are absolutely central to it. And I was pleased that you mentioned the issue of housing, and I said in my own remarks about rough sleeping. There is nothing in this budget about the crying need to build secure council housing with fixed rents, with permanent tenancies, and a secure place to live. I represent a constituency which our council does its best and has built a lot of places. Well done them. I'm exceptional in that I represent an area where there is council house building going on. And when a family gets a council flat, having lived in the private rented sector for 10 or 20 years, you just see the change. You see the change amongst the kids. Suddenly, it's their home. It's a place they can go home to from school, and it's their home. They're not going to be thrown out in 6 months. They're not going to be forced into yet another school move, yet another private rented flat, yet more deposits and so on to be found. Surely that's where we should be putting the emphasis. And so I think those are the key parts of the budget, the missed opportunities on it. And John McDonnell will be giving a more detailed response tomorrow morning on it. And so don't be fooled by the headlines which the press have happily written up this afternoon. This is a budget that finally acknowledges that 10 years of austerity have brought about a failure. It was always a political choice. It was always a political choice to bring in the Health and Social Care Act, to cut benefits, to underfund local authorities, to underfund the health service, and underfund the public health service. The coronavirus crisis at the present time has brought into very sharp relief what we've done to our public services. When hospital bed occupancy is at 94%, that means only 6% of a reduced number of beds are available for people going through a crisis at the present time. And so it means that those are going to be discharged from hospital who shouldn't be. Elective surgery is going to be cancelled in order to make way for this crisis. And those that need ventilators to be helped through this crisis, and they do, there aren't enough of them. There aren't enough trained staff to deliver them. There are 100,000 vacancies across the NHS. And what's their message to migrant workers coming here? We'll increase your charges for access to the National Health Service yourself. Let's get over this nonsense and instead invest in people and stop those greedy companies taking profits out of our NHS and our public services. And I'll finish on this one point. A company called Ride-On tried to get a contract to run services for my local hospital. They didn't get it, so they sued the hospital for £14 million for not getting a contract. Well done, the High Court, in turning down their claim. But this is the kind of pressure our public services are under. And if you sign a trade deal with the USA on the terms that Trump wants, you'll find that writ large over every public service over the whole country. We, my good friends, have got a lot of campaigning to do.
Right. Well, thanks. Thanks very much for that, Jeremy. I'm going to move on to the impact for working people, workers more generally, in a second. But we've got people watching from everywhere across the country, by the way. I just wanted to give a huge shout out to those watching in Southampton right now. They've got a watch party going on. And our Manchester People's Assembly people, some of whom are here, but many, many more up in Bury watching this over a few beers, no doubt, as well. So if you're out there and you're watching this live on Facebook, then please like it, please share it, get more people involved in the debate, and let's see where we go at the end of the debate about motivating people to do more in our communities. But I just wanted to move on to working people. Working people and the impact of this budget on working people. I mean, why has it taken coronavirus for the government to wake up to the realities of sick pay, statutory sick pay, limited to £94 a week, of course. The poorest in society won't get any sick pay because if you don't earn more than £115 a week, you're not entitled to sick pay. The irony of that, the less you're paid, the less you're entitled to by way of sick pay benefit. If you're self-employed or you're on 0 hours contract, you'll get none, of course. So why is it that you think the government is taking coronavirus to wake the government up to this? And what are the missed opportunities for working people? What are we going to do about public sector workers? These are questions in from Amy in Kingston. What's the hope for public sector workers under this government following this budget? You know, years of austerity already around pay austerity and the rest. I would have asked Mark Sawatka this question, of course, but Mark had to give his apologies. You would have seen him on the agenda earlier, but Mark's genuinely had to give his apologies for tonight.
So wish Mark well. We want him healthy and well, so stay home and get through this.
Absolutely, and he will. He will. So that's a question really from Linda in Sheffield and from Amy in Kingston. I'm going to come to the audience in a minute for some more questions as well. But the impact for working people, the missed opportunities for ordinary working people, how is this going to play out? So as an NHS worker, your assessment of this, given the pay cuts that we've suffered in our public services for the last 5 years and beyond?
Yeah, just as we said, like it's a choice to underpay people, and I think again it just shows like if you organise, join a trade union, you can fight for better working conditions. But yeah, I think coronavirus and the government's response to this has been really interesting for all the reasons you said, Jeremy. But also it shows actually if the government want to do something quickly, they can. I think actually welfare is really interesting. So I see this a lot at work. You'll have people coming in and, I'll say, oh, you have to come back tomorrow for an appointment, or we need to do your treatment. And people are like, oh, I can't. I can't, for whatever reason, I'll lose my job or I won't get paid. And then again, with universal credit, we have people coming in who have in the clinic that I work in now, they struggle so hard to get their benefits that we've had to actually employ people in the clinic to help them navigate the system. And something that we've been warning the government, for years, that our accessing, why is the system so deliberately difficult for people to get the support they need just to survive when they're unwell, when they've got disabilities? And then yes, like click of a finger, they're going to make it easier to get all these things. So it showed that actually they can make things easier, but they deliberately didn't. So again, the onus is on us to shine a light on this government and to organise and to put pressure on them. But all of these things, whether it comes to welfare benefits, whether it comes to workers' pay, all these things are decisions that the government have made. So its responsibility is on us to change that.
Okay. And Pfizer, this wider question about working people, this just transition towards more sustainable jobs and a green economy to face up to the climate emergency that we're facing now, seems to me a huge missed opportunity today that will have an impact on ordinary working people and their families and communities for generations to come.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're running out of time on the climate. It's really scary to think how slow we're acting given the stage of which we're at. But in order to get a just transition and not just to have climate investment, you have to have trade unions and workers at the table. And it has been done in other countries where they've invited workers in and they've spoken about how they make that transition, how they make sure that they have unionized jobs and take people with them. That's the only way you can do it. And the thing is about this government is whilst they might, be upping spending on the NHS, they are still, pro-business, pro-privatisation, anti-trade union. So they're not a progressive government at all. And we know that from immigration policy, for instance. And so, this is the thing. This is the thing that makes it so tricky. But what all they're doing is they're throwing money at something, but they're not trying to solve these problems in the right way or at a deep level. And just on this point about the coronavirus and the ways in which it's thrown up the cracks in our system, whether it be in the NHS or employment, this thing right now that they've moved statutory pay at least to day one. I mean, that's some win, and that wouldn't have happened had the trade unions and campaigners not pushed them on that. But still, like we were saying, it's just under £95 a week for statutory pay, and what we have to do is stop this government from using this just as a short-term measure and pushing and getting people together while there is sympathy right now to make sure that this is a bigger long-term shift, because it will just go back to being like from day 3 or whatever, in a few months once they feel that coronavirus is not a threat anymore. So this is an opportunity again, and this is what we're going to have to do over the next few years. Yes, we have to organise in our communities, and that's going to be really big. But any opportunities like this, and obviously it's not an opportunity we'd necessarily want, but in terms of this coronavirus, but we have to take this time and organise and make sure that we don't just allow the government to revert back to the status quo where there is some opening for change.
Yeah, and then the other thing, I think we also focus a lot on the underfunding of the public services, but something that I think we don't always focus enough on is the fragmentation and the marketisation of our public services. So I see this like in the NHS, and I make this joke about, in the A&E I was working in, apart from me and the patient, who are the only things that were not outsourced. And it's a joke, but actually, when it comes to like the cleanings and the portering service, and then our biochem and our patient transport, everything increasingly over the years has been taken over by private companies. And one major thing that makes it very difficult then for workers to organise, because you're all on different contracts, no one knows how much you're paid, a lot of people on 0-hour contracts. Actually, a lot of people in the NHS are on 0-hour contracts because they are being outsourced to private companies. So that's something that we really need to be campaigning hard on, because that's already been happening over the past few years. And yes, the trade deal with the US will lock in that market into our public services, and then it make it very difficult, if we had future Labour government, to reverse that if the trade deal happened. So it's so important. This is an issue now that we need to be campaigning hard on.
And Jeremy, your views on the missed opportunities and the impact this will have on families and communities, particularly around the challenges of the climate emergency, of course, and what we need to do to meet up to our commitment here. But also this wider question about young people and the message of hope that should have come from the government for a younger generation that feel isolated from politics and ignored by politicians.
Young people have never been more involved, more aware and more active in political demands than I can ever remember, and I'm really pleased about that. If nothing else that's happened over the past 5 years has been the growth of young people's involvement in environment issues and so many other things is so important. And so I do think that campaigns about education and education rights, why do we inflict on anyone who wants to go to university the prospect of 50, 60k of debt in order to go to uni? And why do we make some apprenticeships very good and some not very good, which is why I was keen to have a national education service which would guarantee education free from cradle to grave. I think we have to keep up with those demands, but also the levels of stress in the education system, which I talked about, excessive testing, excessive league table-itis between secondary schools rather than working together to achieve good support for all students. But it's on issues of environment. What's been fascinating to me has been going to environment roundtables all over the country over the past year, and they've brought together people who would see themselves as very well informed environmentalists who are concerned about levels of planting, of biodiversity, and all the essential parts of our natural world, together with those that have jobs in industries that do pollute, that work in a transport sector that does pollute, about how they can come together and demand a better, cleaner, more sustainable environment for all of us. And so campaigns about clean air, campaigns about good quality food, campaigns about good quality water and sustainability, and heating systems that do provide people with warm, efficient homes rather than just profits for the energy sector. So we can and must bring all those groups together. So what I would urge is that at a community and local level, we work together on achieving those things. Because, as I said in my contribution, people that breathe foul air lead shorter lives. People that drink bad water tend to get ill, not just in this country, but all around the world. So those standards are very important. And I think the point that Sonia finished on about trade deals of the future, we know what the demands are of the biggest corporations on the kind of trade deal they want. These corporations are supranational. They're more powerful than national governments. They're more powerful than UN and the UN agencies. And they want the right to decide what the working conditions are, what the environmental protocols are, what the consumer rights are, before they invest in a particular country. And they go into that country and say, well, hang on a minute. We're not putting up with these kind of standards. We want to use GM crops in our products, and so on. And so it is a question for all of us in this room and all of us watching online at the moment that we make sure the campaigns we mount around the environment are inclusive of the entirety of the community, understandable for the entirety of the community, but above all unites us in making sure that this government doesn't sign some dodgy trade deal with Trump and the USA, which will actually end up destroying our public services and handing them over to multinational corporations. It's a very, very serious and real threat that's going on at the present time. And I would also say to everybody, join a union, because you learn from joining a union. You can achieve things together from joining a union. And if you're in a union, you're more likely to be better paid than if you're not in a union.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Thanks very much for that, Jeremy. And Pfizer's had to leave us. Pfizer's doing a budget show on Sky in a moment, so she's just nipping off now down to Millbank to do that live, and I'm sure the audience will appreciate the contribution that she's going to make there. She's going to make there as well. Fantastic. Thanks very much. Well, now it's time to come out to the audience. I think there's a roaming mic that's been circulated, and I've got somebody already that's got their hand up, so I'm going to take them. Just before I do, I just want to give a huge shout out to the North East People's Assembly Against Austerity, which is having a watch party in Newcastle. So fantastic! Thanks very much to our people in Newcastle. Huge shout out to Newcastle. Okay, so we've got a question from the floor.
Hi, I'm Jim Scott. I'm convener of Pembrokeshire People's Assembly. Pfizer made a very important point, which is the Tories are in no way ideologically committed to ending austerity. This is just lip service. So my question is, how do we build and expand on the extra parliamentary movement that we must have if we are going to remove this government from power? And importantly, how do we raise awareness of how vital that grassroots movement is?
Brilliant. Well, and a great question about, but I'm going to take a couple, I'm going to group them, but a great question that's coming from a number of other people as well, and perhaps we'll spend a bit of time on that in a moment. I've got a colleague here, and I've got a colleague here, and then I'll come round again.
Hi, my name's Mona. I'm an NHS worker as well. I'm a doctor working in mental health. And if the NHS has had the biggest sustained reduction in spending in the NHS's history, which it has, no area has suffered cuts the way that mental health has suffered cuts. And this is having devastating consequences for patients and their carers. You know, in 2020, I shouldn't have to be sending very young children hundreds of miles away from their families to be able to get the care that they need. And that's if they're lucky enough to be able to get it. You know, we've got 170 children being turned away from mental health services just simply because of the demand that's available. And the other really important thing to mention, because Sonia's spoken about this really well, but the crisis in mental health is actually a crisis that pervades every other area of our lives. So the crisis of precarious work is a mental health crisis. The crisis of rough sleeping is a huge mental health crisis. And absolutely the crisis around our welfare reforms. You know, we have a brutal welfare system which actually has clearly discriminates against people with chronic mental illness and with chronic disabilities, and is putting them through appalling work capability assessments, which themselves have been linked through research studies to completed suicides and to relapses in mental health. So we have a system which is actively discriminating against patients with mental health difficulties and is driving them to relapses of their mental illnesses. And just to mention briefly, I was the psychiatrist involved in putting together the petition to ensure that Ian Duncan Smith doesn't get knighted, and we are. And of course he's going to get knighted, but that wasn't really the role of the petition. It was to highlight and to shine a light on the plight of a lot of people in our communities that we don't see. But you know, since 2012, working in mental health, I've been meeting with patients who come to me devastated and anxious and terrified about the fact that they're not going to be able to prove that they're deserving of their benefits at their work capability assessment. So it was really just to shine a light on that. And we are handing in that petition later this month on the 27th. Thanks, Ramona. On the 27th of March. So, so please join us then. And just one final thing, again, Sonia has mentioned this. You know, after Jeremy leaves, we're not going to have the kind of anti-austerity champion in Parliament that we've had for the last 5 years. The change that we want is not going to come from the palaces of Westminster. It never was, but especially now that chance has passed us by, sadly. So really the onus is on us. It's our responsibility to get out there and to make these arguments and to join the campaigns, join the unions, People's Assembly, Stop the War. Please join these organisations, keep our NHS public. Because we're not gonna have this person anymore in Parliament arguing for us, sadly.
Well done.
Well said. Well said.
Well, thanks very much for that. Thanks very much for that. I'll let Jeremy speak for himself, but there's going to be plenty of people that will fight the fight in Parliament. We're just not a majority, but not taking anything away from the fight outside of Parliament, of course. I've got a colleague down here, and then I'm going to come to the panel. So a colleague just at the front here, and then I'll come round again.
Hello, my name is Pierre. I'm a politics student. And my question is basically kind of mainly aimed towards Jeremy. Recently, after 9 months living in rented accommodation, I was told by my living landlord to go, simply put, on the basis of my sexuality and age. I was told that I should live with women. Obviously, this was quite humiliating, but it really raised awareness in the problems around homelessness, and luckily enough, I was able to find accommodation. I'd gone to kind of the council and trade union reps to see kind of what I could get done for it, and I had no rights, I had nothing. So my question is, what can we do to lobby the government and win the argument against the lack of no rights for renters, especially for those with living landlords? And I just think it's appalling that you're out there, and if you can't hardly make ends meet, if you have no money, if you live in paycheck to paycheck, how can you just up and go and be expected to find somewhere to live?
Okay. Well, what a great question. How do we deal with the housing crisis? I suppose it is one for Jeremy. I'm going to ask Sonia to come back on the NHS, and then I think we'll have a bigger debate about what sort of resistance do we need to mount in the 5 years that face us. I mean, we get rid of them tomorrow if we can get rid of them tomorrow. But the reality is they're in there, and we've got to deal with it. So, Jeremy, this last question first, I suppose.
Well, first of all, thanks for the 3 questions that come up, and thanks for the very kind things you said when asking a question about mental health. Just to be absolutely clear, let's put this on the record. I'm not disappearing, I'm not leaving, I'm not going anywhere. I'll be around. I'll be doing stuff, always, okay. And what we have achieved in the past 5 years is defeating the political argument on austerity. Nobody now defends austerity as a sensible way forward. So that's quite important and quite significant. And that wasn't achieved without an awful lot of work. It wasn't me, it was all of you, everybody, doing this campaign ever since 2010. And the idea that anyone would now not vote against cuts in benefits has gone. So there's been some big advances there. Do you want me to deal with the 3 questions, Steve?
Well, the housing question.
I'll deal with the housing one.
Come back to...
Of course. Well, thanks very much for your question. From what you've said, you've been abominably treated, and what was done to you sounds to me fundamentally illegal in terms of basic discrimination. You should not be discriminated against on the basis of age, sexuality, gender, ethnicity, race, language, religion, whatever it is. You should not be discriminated against. And from everything you've said there, it sounds as though you were. So I'd have thought you've got a very strong case there. But what it also shows is the insecurity of the private rented sector. Because if you have a tenancy which is a short hold, and a short hold tenancy, then the end of that tenancy, it doesn't have to be renewed. What a lot of landlords I find do is offer somebody 6 months or 1 year tenancy. The tenant completes their year and carries on paying the rent. They don't actually have a new tenancy. They actually have a landlord that is greatly empowered to get rid of them when it suits that landlord. And so there are legal remedies, but they're quite complicated, and you have to live in a place where you've got somebody who's going to fight that case for you as either a legal aid lawyer, which there aren't very many of, or a law centre or advice bureau or something like that. And so there is a question of fighting for the rights, and one thing that I am keen to do is ensure that local authorities have the power to regulate tenancies and rent levels within their areas. And in some parts of the country that has begun to happen. But my constituency is not that unusual in that probably a third of the people live in the private rented sector. They have the least voice. Council tenants, housing association tenants have a limited voice, but they do have some voice. And generally speaking, they're better landlords as well. The private rented sector tenants have no voice whatsoever. So I would urge local people's assembly groups to encourage private sector tenants to come together and fight for better conditions, fight for environmental health inspections of their properties, and defend those people like yourself who appear to be unfairly evicted. And so let's work very hard on housing. Housing crisis leads into the mental health crisis as well.
Great, thanks very much for that, Jeremy. Do you want to add anything to the comment that Mona made about the NHS mental health in particular?
Yeah, I will. But I just want to touch on what Pierre mentioned about how his sexuality was discriminated against by his landlord. And I do feel that the current people in power have actually emboldened the bigots in our society. Yeah. And I think we haven't talked about this enough in the past hour, but I do feel that homophobia, transphobia, racism, and just general bigotry is on the rise in our society at the moment, and we really need to be fighting against this hard in your groups and on the streets. We can't let this continue. And housing, insecurity of housing, we see that actually a lot of people coming in causing mental health issues, and also it is shocking the number of kids coming into hospital who their health has been harmed because their housing conditions are so bad. Definitely insecure housing is a massive issue. And then, James, I think you need to answer the question. How do we grow the movement? We have to all answer that question. We need to be getting involved, join a local group. If there isn't a local group, make your own local group, find an issue that you care about. If you see injustice, campaign on it. And also I think it's important that sometimes on the left we go into our little silos. We need to understand that we're all on the same side and actually join together and work together and organise is how you become more powerful. And I think Mona said about the mental health crisis, she said it so beautifully, but I can't think of any physical health issue where it would be okay with kids and adults being sent to the other part of the country when they need admitted. I've just started a mental health job and we have patients from our area who are in Yorkshire, kids. That's the situation. It's been going on for years. We've been talking about it for years. It's not been a priority for this government, so we need to make it a priority. It's not acceptable.
Great. Okay, right. Well, I've just been given notice that we're in our last couple of minutes of this hour. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to go back to it. But I've got a question. Even on question time, I always end up with a bit of humour in a question. And there's a question that's come in from Roberto in Glasgow. And he says, does Chris Grayling's latest appointment, this is to the Intelligence Committee, for those that are not aware of it, prove that Boris Johnson's got a sense of humour after all? So, one word answers, I suppose, Jeremy and Sonia.
It shows Bojo's desperate, and Chris Grayling is the most expensive cabinet minister there ever was anywhere. I mean, come on. A guy that gives a contract to a ferry company that doesn't have any ships doesn't show to me somebody that should ever be put in charge of anything. Grayling, move over, get out of the way, and let somebody intelligent do the intelligence job.
I'm going to disagree with you, Jeremy, because I quite like having Grayling in a cabinet position for pure comedy value. So let's keep him in over the next few years. Let's laugh at all his idiot incompetencies, and then let's get him out in 4 years' time.
Fantastic. We all love a failing Grayling, don't we? And he's been failing on so many counts recently. He has got that comedy mileage in him that's priceless, really. Well, that does bring us then. I know we could talk forever and a day about the budget and about Chris Grayling as well. Yeah, about what we need to do and how we build our movement as well. I just want to spend the last minute so just thanking all of you here in Central Hall that turned up tonight. We're not going anywhere, so we can have this discussion once we go offline, live, that's fine. And I want to thank all of those groups that tuned in on their watch sessions, that liked it, that passed it on, that are building their groups in their communities. Because if there is this message, and it goes back to the question that was asked earlier about the importance of the People's Assembly as a movement. You know, I go back to the beginning of this in 2012 when we wanted to build an alternative to the ideology of austerity. And we wanted to bring a movement together, a really broad movement. And it's a huge tribute, I think, to the People's Assembly. And the way in which we manage that, bringing social movements together, bringing the trade union movement together, bringing political parties together. It's not just a Labour movement as such. Amelia Womack is the joint chair of the People's Assembly with me from the Green Party. And Amelia was going to be with us tonight, but Amelia, again, couldn't make it for different reasons, but she gave her apologies for tonight. And the fact that we left all those things that we don't agree amongst each other on outside of the room has enabled us to remain strong as a movement, fighting on those issues that we do remain committed to and in solidarity with one another about. And that is about austerity and the impact of austerity, and the fight for social justice and human rights, the fight for equality and the attack on people like yourself, Pia, and you know, heart-moving story, their personal rendition there, but you could have hundreds of stories. I'm sure everyone in this audience has got stories of how that whole narrative of hate and division is spreading across society and what we need to do about it. So look, if we can do anything coming out of tonight, is make sure that, you know, we're joining our local groups. We have hundreds of groups, People's Assemblies groups across our countries, from the smallest villages that have thought politics are deserting them. I go to some meetings and they said, we haven't had a political meeting in 20 years. And yet they've got a People's Assembly now, and they've got people turning up because they want a battle of ideas. They want to discuss ideas for change and a better society. And that's fantastic. You see that in the smallest villages across communities in our biggest cities. So join a group, get involved, get active, because at the end of the day, it's about activity. You ain't going to change the world writing letters. At the end of the day, you've got to get on the streets. This is a movement that we're building. And the points that were made earlier about we're not going to win many votes in Parliament during the course of this Parliament, however long that lasts, and we hope it's as short, of course, as possible. But with that sort of majority in there, it's going to be very difficult. We're going to have to find other ways of fighting the good fight. We're going to have to do it at a local government level. We're going to do it with our mayoralties. We're going to do it in devolved government where we can. We're certainly going to do it on our streets. We're going to do it by building a movement across our communities with our trade unions, other political partners and everybody else. That's the importance of the People's Assembly. It's a great tribute that we haven't split like so many other groups have split to the five corners of the earth and called themselves all sorts of names over the course of the last period. We don't do that. I know we find it hard in the left not to write a book in answer to something. We really, you know, and it just props open a door somewhere. Nobody bothers to read it. We've got to be smarter. We've got to be a bit more sophisticated with our narrative. We've got to get out there and have a debate with people on terms that they can have a debate with in their language. We need more people that speak like ordinary people, out there on the doorstep, eyeballing people and having a discussion about what's important to all of us. I think that's how we build our movement. So get involved in your local groups. If you haven't got a local group, form one. That's the reality of it. Build a local group. Get together in that small group and build it. That's how we've all started. We've all started from one person who decided they wanted to stand up and do something. Whether that's in your union, in a workplace, or whether that's a political movement in your community. You've got to make a decision to stand up and do something. And you can do that. So if you want some inspiration, listen to Laura Pidcock's video. Laura's now our National Secretary. Laura as well, unfortunately, had to give apologies tonight. It's Laura Pidcock's Pidcast, that's what she calls it, and it's a fantastic Pidcast, and I'd urge you all to go and tune in and listen to that and share that as widely as we can share it as well. And of course, none of this happens on the freebie. At the end of the day, we've had to pay for this tonight. We have to pay for all of our demonstrations, our movement. We build our movement. So if you can donate to the People's Assembly, then please do that as well. And if you can make a regular donation by standing order, all the better, because that's what gives us the ability to make events like this come alive. So that's really tonight. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank our panel. What a fantastic panel we've had. Fantastic panel. I want to thank all of you in Central Hall. And again, I want to thank all of you tuned in live on Facebook. What a fantastic event. Thanks very much. We ain't going nowhere. And we'll do one in the north next time. That's the deal.
You're on.
See, he's a trade unionist, though. He's always been a trade unionist, is that, Jeremy? Fantastic. We'll do one in the north. Thanks very much, colleagues. Brilliant.